Welcome to NSO's The Silent Majority podcast. Today is a very special day. We have a wonderful guest, Dr. Rose Moten, here with us. Dr. Rose Moten is a licensed psychologist, author, speaker, founder of the Bloom Transformation Center in Detroit. She's world-renowned, nationally acclaimed. She's just a phenomenal gem in our community. She helps individuals, families, and communities heal from trauma, grief, and generational cycles of pain. You've got over 20 years of clinical experience.
Oh my
Dr.
God, this is the 27th year. Can you believe that? Like, where has the time gone?
I know, we're aging back.
I know we are, like Benjamin Button. And with the new new hairdo.
Yes,
oh my
yes,
God. You know,
yes.
they say when a woman gets a new hairdo, when she does the big chop, you better watch out.
That's right. You have to cut everything away from my new bloom.
So
my
good. I
new
love
bloom.
it. I love it.
Thank you so much. Well, you know, you were one of the first people to partner with us for the Don't Touch Me campaign. And you know, before we get started with the questions, tell us why the Don't Touch Me campaign resonated with you.
Yeah, you know, for several reasons it resonated with me. First of all, mom of four. They're all adults now, but you know, during those formative years, that's our main priority, to protect our children. And we do the best, but we can't be around them 24/7. But also definitely as a clinical psychologist, although I don't treat children particularly, I treat adults who were once children. Mm-hmm. And so I've seen, as we just mentioned, for now almost 3 decades, the devastating impact that child abuse, be it physical, sexual, or even both, or even emotional abuse, has on an individual throughout the lifetime, not just through that childhood. So I'm dealing with individuals who have been carrying a lot of pain, a lot of shame, a lot of secrets for decades. And I always say you cannot outrun, outlive, outachieve, you know, or outsmart trauma that you have not dealt with.
Yeah. So by the time they come to you, are they coming to say, I have been abused and these childhood traumas are coming up, or is it other things that cause them to have symptoms that need attention?
So that's a great question, because typically, no, they're not coming for that. They're coming because their marriage is on the rocks, right? Or they're underperforming at work, or they just can't seem to find their way in life. They are, you know, feel like that they are a leaf in the wind and just don't know what direction to go in. And it's not until we dive a little deeper and start really getting to the source that we realize that what's really going on, again, as I said, is this unresolved trauma from childhood abuse that has, again, not obvious that that's what it is, but it has infiltrated every area of their lives.
Because I remember you saying at some point that children respond differently to trauma. They suppress the trauma. And instead of like adults, you know, it's heavy on our sleeves. We might react or respond to it. Children dig it. They tuck it way down deep inside.
Yeah, they tuck it. Many adults do too. But you can imagine how hard it is for adults to even deal with it. A child whose brain has not even fully, you know, developed the regions of the brain that can understand the whys, or understand, you know, that this isn't about me being unlovable or not, you know, worthy. They don't know what to do with this information and these experiences coming in. And so oftentimes there's a disconnect, there's a suppressing it, which is dangerous, because that's where early on in life you start disconnecting from reality.
Yes. And you know, those childhood traumas that fester, so to speak, in our bodies, the study with the Center for Disease Control and Kaiser Permanente, the ACEs study, says that those traumas lead to chronic health, mental health, and medical problems in adulthood.
Yes. I will tell you this. When I get clients, majority of women is who I see. I see men, women, couples, you know. But when I get clients, especially women, and they are telling me they have an autoimmune disorder, or some, even, believe it or not, even breast cancer or other forms of cancer, I'm always, my first thing is not to necessarily look what happened on a medical basis, because that's not my specialty, but I'm a firm believer that most things that ail us physically first started emotionally within us. And because we as a society have not really addressed how we, the language that is okay and acceptable for us to say when we are hurting emotionally, oftentimes that suppression, because it needs to be expressed, like I said, you can't outrun it. It's going to be expressed one way, and if you can't express it through words and validating your emotions and feelings and doing the trauma work, it's going to express physically.
And the science is catching up to that. So
Yes,
we
absolutely.
intuitively had a sense of that for some time. I'm a nurse, so I have a
Mm-hmm.
scientific background, and scientists are now, revealing these emotional energies,
Yeah,
so to
yeah.
speak, in our bodies impact our DNA. It's called
Yes.
epigenetics.
Epigenetics is so real.
Hmm.
It's so, and that's so, because the risk with that, with epigenetics, is that if you don't deal with it, it gets passed down
That's
generationally.
right.
We used to call it the family or generational curse or
Yes.
what have you.
Yes.
And lots of people looked at that like, ooh, woo ha, what is
Hmm.
that? But now we're realizing there is science. I always tell people you can explain anything through spirituality, that's the whole generational curse, or
Right.
through science. And so
That's
the
right.
epigenetics explains the generational curse thing. That's why you oftentimes see things repeat in families, or as you talk about epigenetics, the impact that it has physically on the generations to come. So if you have a family that with a history of autoimmune disorder, it's a higher likelihood of your children having it. But what I've also seen is over the years, people who are brave and courageous enough to address these things and bring what was suppressed to the surface are changing the course, not just for them, but for all the generations to come.
Yes, because it actually truly affects the central nervous system.
It does.
There is a physiologic response to trauma, and likewise, there's a physiologic response to the healing of trauma.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's the beautiful news
It
there.
is the
Yeah.
beautiful news that there is a silver lining to
Mm-hmm.
this, that we have the ability to not only heal ourselves and our bodies physically, spiritually,
Mm-hmm.
mentally, emotionally, but we can heal generations to come.
Absolutely.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So in your work, talking about, you mentioned some of the people that you see, adults, children, adults primarily, not necessarily children, who may have had some type of trauma in their childhood. What kind of patterns do you see in people who have this suppressed trauma?
Yeah, just a pattern of self sabotage, oftentimes. Self sabotage in relationships and career. There's sometimes this underlying belief system of not being worthy, that's really wrapped in shame. So those are many of the patterns. Like I said, it infiltrates not just their relationships, where they may find themselves just not able to secure healthy relationships, but also in their careers, not having a lack of vision or purpose in their lives. Um, there was what it's something, just it'll come back, but it was something I definitely wanted to even touch on that. But definitely the self sabotage, the underlying shame that exists in there, that just permeates just everything, unfortunately. And but again, like we said, the hope is this doesn't have to be the case.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be the case at all. It just takes that one person who's courageous enough to say, you know what, I think it's time for me to bring this to the surface.
And it's not a coincidence that you see people who have had this experience and may not have had justice
Mm-hmm.
as
Mm-hmm.
a result of it. Um, those are the ones who suffer the trauma the most. The trauma
Yeah.
alone is awful.
Yeah.
But if you don't have justice, if you
Yeah.
weren't believed, Do you think that those effects are more devastating or have a greater impact on the person?
They definitely can be, not just when they didn't get justice, but oftentimes the perpetrators are still around,
Oh,
right?
wow.
So it's not that, that's not just I didn't get justice, it's that now I have to just even tell myself it wasn't as big as a deal as I may be making it out to be, because if I do, how am I going to be able to even be around this family member that, or my parent or whomever it may be that inflicted that on you. The other thing I want to say in regards to, you asked what patterns do I see, a lack of boundary setting oftentimes for individuals who have gone through that as a child, just very loose boundaries where they don't put themselves first, or they continue to allow themselves to be in situations where they're being taken advantage of or they're being abused. You often see these individuals entering into friendships with narcissists, or folks who are going to just continue that pattern that they got used to as a child of being not validated and
that
abused.
goes back to the root of unworthiness and
Yes,
shame.
absolutely.
So you mentioned narcissists. So let's
Mm-hmm.
talk about some of the traits and
Yeah,
behaviors of abusers, people
yeah, yeah.
who prey on children in this
Mm-hmm.
way. What does that look like for the people watching this? What
Yeah, and
are
it's
some of the
no
signs?
way in this time that we can go through an all exhaustive
Right,
list. And the
of
reason
course.
I even state that is because if you don't hear something, if I don't say something that maybe your, abuser was characterized by, I don't want you to say, oh, maybe it wasn't abuse.
Right.
So there's so many different things you can, a lack of empathy, poor emotional regulation. So not knowing how to even manage their emotions. So there's a lack of emotional maturity and emotional intelligence there. And the lashing out,
Mm.
the inability um, to understand, that region in the brain that says, okay, this isn't right or wrong. Probably a questionable moral compass as well.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many different traits that you can find it, and again, it could be just a person who is just, presents themselves as just being the perfect guy to, or the perfect woman to everyone else on the outside. So that's why I really wanted to even preface before I said that if you don't hear something, as far as I'm describing the different characteristics, that doesn't mean that it didn't apply to that person. But there's so many abusers. There's no. It would be great if it was one thing we had to look for.
Yeah, that would help a lot,
Yeah.
wouldn't it?
We teach our kids oftentimes to look out for the boogeyman or the strangers, or these things. But how often do you have the conversation to tell your children that that person you need to look out for could possibly be a family member, a sibling,
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
parent?
76%, almost 80%
Mm,
of abusers are family
our
members,
family members.
people
So,
close to the child.
overwhelming
Yes.
majority. And that's the conversation we should be having.
Yes.
And that's why I commend you so much for this campaign, because when you think about historically, I know when we were growing up, it was all about the strangers, right,
Yes.
in the street, or
Yes.
it was 8 o'clock. Do you
Yes.
know where your children are?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
they're in the house with the uncle who's molesting or the aunt who's molesting,
Mm-hmm.
but it was never, that was just a conversation never had. And so as a child, we were taught at a very young age, watch out for strangers, don't talk to strangers. But we're not teaching our children to also be on alert for folks that, you know,
Right in your own
right in
home
your own
environment.
home,
Yeah.
that may be watching you while your parents are away. Yeah.
So there was, for me, I it wasn't until something happened that I started teaching, my children
Yeah.
about protect yourself
Yeah.
rules and things like that. What is a good age? Because, we, like you said, growing up, we had
Mm-hmm.
public service
Mm-hmm.
announcements about strangers and things like that. But what would you say is a good age to start teaching your children about protecting yourself
Yeah.
and stranger danger, as
Yeah.
we used to
Yeah.
call it?
You as early as possible. And so there's no such thing as that's too young. Whatever's age appropriate for that child, even an infant that has not quite grasped language yet, still understands. So there's age appropriate ways you can start even just implementing an awareness of that good touch, bad touch. A child, a 1 year old, a 1.5 year old, you can use a toy doll or to demonstrate, like bad touch, that type of thing. And as they get older, your language with them becomes more sophisticated of what you're doing. So there's no such thing as waiting until this most opportune time to have this conversation. It should be an ongoing conversation. It's not we have this conversation once and that's it. It needs to be ongoing, and there needs to be ongoing check-ins as well. And I think that's a great thing parents can do. Maybe even tell themselves at the end of the 30th of each month, because every month at least has February, doesn't have it, but it could be monthly check-ins. It could be, weekly check-ins.
How does a parent do that? What does a check-in look like?
Hey, how you feeling? Anything, what's the highlight of your, because you don't want to make it all about this, come to them every time like,
right,
has something bad happened? But you want to open up these channels of communication where the child feels comfortable enough talking to you. So it can be, hey, so what was the highlight of your week? What was the best thing that happened to you? Or give me the 3 best things. Like these type of conversations they can take 5 minutes. I mean, honestly. And then you can say, okay, what was something that you wish had not happened? And kind of explore that. Look at your child. Observe their body language, because they may not, even when things have happened, be so just confident enough to even share it. But we know our children well enough, especially if you start noticing some difference in behavior. I recently had a person share with me who witnessed her being abused, their parent being abused, how their daughter's grades and performance in school, even school refusal, something that had never happened again. And it happened before. And this person was not making the connection that even though that child wasn't directly abused, they and did not witness their mother being abused. They were aware of what had happened. Yeah. And that in and of itself was enough to kind of just send her down a spiral, because while everyone was checking in with the mom and the actual, I guess the first degree victim of the assault.
That's secondary.
Yeah. They weren't, considering the secondary effects of it. Yeah.
Much like secondhand smoke.
Like secondhand smoke. And as parents, we want to be aware of that. There's some things I know. After my divorce, there was a lot of just upheaval that I experienced, personally directed toward me. I know it also affected my children, even though they weren't directly, the ones that was being targeted. It impacted them. And my oldest son, as older children oftentimes do, took on this role, even subconsciously, as protector. But at the age of 13, he was diagnosed with Crohn's. And I know without a shadow of a doubt that upheaval during that time and the stress and the anxiety that he was experiencing impacted that. Now fast forward and he's in his early 30s. And
hey, you're dating yourself now.
I know, right? I was 10 when I had
you were 10.
But he's still dealing with that illness. He's gotten great control over it, but it's just, as a mom, it's like, you still feel so much guilt, because I would have done anything in the world to have prevented that having that impact on him. But that's one example of many examples of how things can continue generationally to affect people when we don't understand the impact that abuse and even observed abuse can have on children.
I mean, you can almost say that everything that affects us, physiologically is rooted in some kind of emotional injury.
I totally believe that.
Yeah.
I remember years ago, one of the churches that I would attend, the minister and I commended her for even sharing that. She said, nothing happens on a physical level without first happening on that emotional and spiritual level. And that has always stuck with me. And as a psychologist, I see it time and time again. Yeah.
And that is why it's so critically important for us who are gifted with this opportunity to be parents
Yes.
to create the most safe, loving, nurturing, peaceful environment as possible. Oftentimes people get it when they're pregnant
Yeah.
and they do everything they can to preserve
very
that
true.
safe space while pregnant. But that child needs that same kind of protective environment as they
Yes.
matriculate into adulthood.
Yes. Yes.
And sometimes we forget that
Yeah.
as people. So, there's with so much happening in our society today, and I think the internet and social media has made us more aware of the prevalence of abuse of children. The late Dr. Brock, who was the chair of the American Academy of Pediatrics, said that childhood trauma or child abuse is the number one unaddressed public health crisis in America.
Wow. Yeah.
What do you think it is about our society that we're still struggling with this well-being of children, the vulnerable little people that we're supposed to protect?
Yeah.
Why are we still struggling with that?
It's such it makes no sense, because again, this is our most vulnerable population, and you would think that tons of resources and attention would go towards that, but I think there's so many layers and dynamics we have to consider. We know even culturally in our culture what lots of people were told. It's interesting. My parents never said this to me, but so many people I know say they grew up and parents were like, don't, what happens in this house stays in this house, that type of thing. Don't share your business, or it was just the norm to, hide the skeletons in the closet, or just not talk. Like this lack of communication. I recently opened up for Maria Shriver in California.
I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, so
it
was an amazing experience. So she just wrote a book that after her showing, I was out in California, it became another best-selling book, New York Times best-selling book, but it's called I Am Maria. And so I was asked to come out and open up her book talk with an intentional meditation for the audience. It was amazing. Fantastic. But it was fantastic.
Tell the audience what intentional meditation is.
Yeah, she likes to start, from what I heard, her book talks with someone who sets an intention. And so people will usually get up and maybe do a prayer or do, some type of intention. I decided to do a guided meditation and accompany it with sound, because sound healing is one of the practices we do at my center, which science is now showing has remarkable effects, where the FDA has now approved sound thanks to studies at the University of Michigan, even in the treatment of cancer. Wow. So it's a powerful, intentions by itself is powerful. Added with sound, it even becomes more powerful.
I've been to your sound healing class, and it's amazing. Absolutely amazing. Yes. Talk about reprogramming your central nervous system.
And that's what it's all about, because the central nervous system, especially for individuals that have been abused, is in this constant fight or flight. Like, it never goes back to
survival mode.
Yeah, it's constant survival mode. People can spend decades, and when it's in constant survival mode, that makes you more susceptible to all types of diseases, right? All types of chronic disease. But the reason I even brought up the Maria Shriver talk is that when you said, why don't people talk about this? Why do they keep it a secret? And this is a book of poetry she wrote, but it tells stories and about her kind of just coming to the truth of who she was, and how even some of the ways her parents handled things, having two uncles assassinated, and losing we know the stuff the Kennedy family went through, right? She talks about how they just never talked about it. It was like, get back to work. Like, we have work to do. But one of the things that really struck me, she read a poem and she shared the inspiration behind that was her mother's room had a padded door on it. you're looking,
Yeah,
and
like,
that's
why-
how
why
everyone
does
is
she
like,
have a
what,
padded
what?
door?
And she said she just thought that was the norm. She thought everybody's mother's room had a padded door, but from what she spoke and talked about is because you could not express your grief in public, your pain in public. You had to stay stoic. You had to stay, committed to doing the business. That was used to muffle the wails, the crying, the pain,
Wow.
the hurt, because that could not be part of your persona. And so even now, her book is all about really having for herself to heal herself from that expectation and finally grieve and acknowledge the emotions that she carried from all of the different traumas and up and downs and curveballs that life had thrown her. Yeah.
And that is symbolic. We're talking about the Kennedys.
The
here.
Kennedys,
So
right?
there is this affects everybody.
Yeah.
It doesn't. It's not a respecter of socioeconomic class or
Not
family
at all.
origin. This affects everyone.
All of us.
If you're a human being,
It's affected. You've been
affecting you.
traumatized.
That's right. That's right. That is so true. So one of the things that we want to do as this movement, this campaign is truly a coalition of organizations, individuals, supporters, and we have resources on our website at don'ttouchme.wiki, video resources so parents can educate their children, like you said, whenever.
That is great.
At early
So
stages.
if they don't know how, they can go. You
how.
guys, that is so great.
Yes,
that you
even
guys are doing that.
professionals. There's professionals who don't, understand how to engage this conversation or how to recognize children. Oftentimes, people think that if children don't say anything, the abuse didn't happen.
Yeah.
Well, to your point, children don't have the words. They don't know how to.
The language.
They don't have the language to express what's happening to them, and they may think, just like Maria thought, every parent, every mom had a padded door.
Yeah.
That child may think that's
This is the
This
norm.
is just the way life is.
This is what everyone goes through.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And so we are really launching this effort to have a bill introduced and that will become law that requires training for professionals involved in investigations of a child abuse, from the investigators, law enforcement, all the way through judiciary, so that there's age-specific, trauma-informed
I love it.
people working on these cases of children. Can you believe that today in the state of Michigan, there's no required training? So tell us why, something like that might be have a great impact.
It definitely will have a great impact because developmentally, like I love the analogy used when, as a mom of 4, right? When their kids are in utero, we're doing everything in our power to protect them. From the moment we find out we're pregnant, it's like, no more Friday night cocktails, right? Whatever, stay away from people who smoke and all these type of things that we do. Then the child comes here and it's like, oh, they're here now. But just like there's 9 months of development in utero, when the child gets here, that starts the clock on a whole new developmental cycle that continues throughout our lives. But Eric Erickson, I'm really big on the 8 stages of psychosocial development that Eric Erickson, one of the early notable psychologists, developed, because depending on that child's age, there are key developmental things that's crucial for that child to develop during that age frame that is going to help with the building blocks of healthy development in the future. So when there's some trauma that happens at particular ages, like you think about, there's a certain age from 3 to 6 is initiative versus guilt, right? And so that's the stage where a kid starts to want to take the initiative to do things on their own. They want to put on their own shoes, even though if they're on the wrong foot, they still feel like, I did it, I got my shoes on.
We all have those kind of
we
photos
all
of our
have
kids,
those, right? The shoes, the mismatched shoes, it doesn't matter, clothes inside out, and it's like that's we laugh, but that's so key. Even though it wasn't right, that starts the building block for them getting it right, and that also starts the building block for them to say, you know what, I can take the initiative in life. right?
Build
I
self-esteem.
can do things. And then there's another one, autonomy versus shame and doubt. That's after that. So that's roughly from like roughly 7-ish, around that age group. So this is when a child thinks, okay, going to school, I can be alone, I can survive the school day. And then you come home, I have a sense of autonomy now, I can do things on my own. Or if it's something that it's some traumatic event that happens, or that child is not encouraged to start demonstrating a sense of autonomy, they invariably starts developing a sense of shame and doubt. And you can think about, that's the prime age too where a lot of abuse starts. And so that's why victims are so just inundated with this sense of shame and doubt as an adult. That's afraid to take chances. That's afraid to.
So the age where the abuse happens,
it
kind of keeps them stagnated at that.
Absolutely. So like an arrested development.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And so trauma informed like awareness is going to help them. If you know you're seeing a 3-year-old or a 6-year-old or what have you, you can start looking at, if the teacher's saying, this, they just don't even try to do their schoolwork. I know they're capable, but it's like, okay, maybe at that stage where initiative was being developed, something was going on. I mean, we can work backwards to try to put the puzzle pieces together. And that's why having this awareness and being educated on these stages is so important for individuals working in this field, because it's not a cookie cutter type
and
of
we're
situation.
taught it as parents. At this stage your child should be crawling. At this stage your child should be walking. At this stage language should be forming. At this stage your child should be able to recite their alphabet or starting to read. So we know these developmental milestones from an education perspective and a progression through life and their independence, but not necessarily how their brains develop and respond and process information.
And the emotional expression
Yes.
of some disconnect or trauma that could have happened. What are the emotional things we should look for? We even on a physical basis, we know encopresis and enuresis, when a child wets or soils themselves, they know physically that's usually an indication of there's potentially some sexual abuse or some other trauma going on. So people are educated in that, but again, that's a physical response because the child doesn't have the language. They are responding physically. But that's another clue. But we have to start looking at the emotional symptoms or telltale signs that could help us understand what's really going on.
So that being said, every 9 minutes, a child is sexually abused. So if there's a parent watching this podcast and they have suspicions that their child may be being abused, likely by a family member, as we know the statistics are heavily weighted in that direction, what would you say to a parent?
I would say trust your gut and investigate. Do not talk yourself out of it. At the same time, you also have to check in with yourself and make sure that some stuff you haven't dealt with is not playing a role in this. And I say that because even I remember many years ago, a patient was very upset. It was a man, and his mother-in-law accused him of touching his daughter inappropriately. And he explained his daughter, like dads do, was on his shoulders. He's around the family, and he had his hands, holding his daughter up. And the grandmother, said he was rubbing inappropriately in his daughter's thighs, which the first thing I asked was the mother-in-law molested as a child? And he's like, yeah, my wife told me she was. And I'm like, okay, that's where, again, she had a suspicion, but she was basing it off some unresolved stuff of hers. Because this dad, it didn't fit the profile because he's around everyone. He has his daughter. It's not like he was in a secret room with her or what have you, but we still have to investigate each case, but we also have to check in with ourselves and make sure that our unresolved stuff isn't coloring and we're not projecting it on what we're seeing before us.
Yeah, and that's a very good point, because our movement is not about, imposing undue stress and harm to individuals
Yeah.
who may be innocent.
Yeah.
This is about protecting children with
Absolutely.
known disclosures or physical evidence of abuse. And our society is just not doing enough. We just, we talked about an article that came out just today.
Yeah.
I think about every 7 to 10 days I get another report about a child who's died
and fell through the cracks.
Fell through the cracks horribly. This poor baby was abused, 3 years old, by the mother, who had been removed from the child had been removed from the home multiple times. So Child Protective Services and law enforcement had been involved, but they kept giving the child back to the mother without any supports, without any, and the mom killed the baby, put the baby in a freezer. And the smell of the decomposing body is what triggered the baby being found.
In that article, the child's name was Chase, but it was even discussed how at one time he was hit so hard he was blinded from it. So it's like, at some point, it was an awareness that this child was blinded from abuse, because I don't think that was something that was discovered, post-mortem.
Right.
So like how could this possibly
how
happen?
Can our system fail this poor baby to that at 3 years old? They have endured such abuse that they were blinded.
It's horrific to even think about.
It's absolutely horrific. And so that's what this Don't Touch Me campaign is all about, helping.
I just appreciate
don't do
you
that.
taking the initiative to do this. Even the name, it's in your face, and it needs to be in your face, because it needs to be jarring enough where people are going to take a look. We don't want to sugarcoat it, because we want to give children a voice to say, don't touch me. That's another. You talk about, why does this happen so much? Because we live in a society where children are meant to be seen and not heard. That's that type of. So many children are not even encouraged to have a voice at a young age, and you add that, you compound that expectation with abuse and the shame that comes with it. It just, again, just further buries their voice. So, but teaching our kids, own your voice and speak it loud. If someone offends you, don't, say it loud. Don't touch me.
Yes.
And say it loud enough so everyone around you can hear it.
I practiced with mine.
Yeah.
Let me hear you say it.
I love
because it is important, and you're right. The name is intended to be jarring. It is intended. I can't believe that society is not outraged by what happened to Chase and so many others that we've already talked about. Every day, this is happening. We should be marching in the streets about this. We should be challenging our system to do a better job at protecting our kids, because one day, you never know, it might be yours. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said that an injustice anywhere is an injustice everywhere.
Yes.
And so just because it's not your child per se, this is somebody's child. It is a child that needs all of us adults to protect him or her.
Absolutely.
So any parting, as we wrap this up, any parting comments that you'd like to share with the audience today?
No, I just appreciate these conversations are being had. Again, 25 plus years ago when I started my career journey, this was such taboo to even talk about in public. When you talk about physical abuse, but definitely sexual abuse, it was one of those things people just felt uncomfortable discussing, as if that meant it would go away. If we don't, or as if we talk about it, it'll make it real. No, it's real. It's real. So I always say only through dialogue does change occur. So the only way we're going to change and remedy this and eradicate this injustice against children is having the dialogue. So I commend you, NSO, for really taking the lead on this.
Yes, and that's why we're here. The dialogue is important in educating the public, getting the word out, keeping it front and center so that people care. I believe in humanity. I believe that people have hearts that really do
Yeah.
care about each other, and
So
that
do
if
I.
we present the information and the compelling issues, that people will respond. And so that's why we are having this critical dialogue. Dr. Rose Moten, thank you so much
Thank
for
you for
being
having
here on the Silent
me.
Majority, our Don't Touch Me series. You're so beautiful and
Oh,
doing
right
such
back at
great
you.
work in the
Right back
community.
at you,
I'm
lady.
looking, I think Maria Shriver said you should be a global phenom. You should
She
be in
did. When
DC.
that comes
Yeah, we're
from
looking for
Maria
it. We're looking
Shriver,
for
I
it.
speak it into existence, well, you know.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thank
And your
you.
website is Bloom Transformation
Yeah,
Center.
bloomtransformationcenter.com, or my website is drrosemoten, moten.com.
Yes. If you haven't heard of her, check her out. She's absolutely amazing. Thank you so
Thank
much for being
you.
with us today.